Hey guys, so welcome to the 11th Q&A. It's funny because today we have no questions, and so it's going to be kind of a conversation. And I just have kind of a statement or quote, and then we're going to just see where it goes. So the quote is, "A good teacher will guide you towards what is ugly." And, if you've been watching, our lives and Q&As, of course we've talked about this, but let's see if there's something else, another angle. And I guess it's the same thing. The other thing that I wrote is um, good guidance which is related to, what is ugly. Good guidance will guide you towards what does not seem spiritual. So the very real human aspect of your life, whatever that is. So it's like, for example, money or relationships. So when people try to guide you towards what seems to be not human, it always seems to be something spiritual, something that you can't really see with your eyes. Um, generally that's not good guidance because where all of our deepest problems are is in the real stuff, is in the human stuff. And it's funny, that's why people avoid it and they think that they're progressing, right? You can fool yourself to such a degree on the spiritual path. You can feel peace, and I mean, it's not real peace, but you can have an experience of peace while completely lying to yourself and being in complete denial. So that's an example that shows you what can happen, how much you can lie to yourself. We're already lying to ourselves from the very beginning, but once you kind of start being on the spiritual path, it's sort of like the ego finds new ways. I think sometimes deeper ways than before awakening, right? To lie to yourself. Um, and so guiding towards what is ugly. I'm just trying to think of what I could say about that. Um, what comes to mind is that I just have to use words, the real path. It sounds like my path. It's like you have to believe I'm the only one that knows what the real path is. But what I'm saying is the genuine path, the more mature path, um, is basically you owning the fact that you are filled with ugliness. Actually, that's a good way to put it. Ugliness in the sense, so for example, if you take hatred, right? At first, it's hard to even feel hatred, if especially if you've always thought that you're a really good person or you don't judge people. Hatred is going to be hard to access. You might access some anger, you're irritated with someone, but not that deep hatred, right? Sort of like a Hitler hatred, where you want to just, eliminate people just because of something they did to you. But since all of this is there, when I talk about hatred, maybe it's just like a very deep aspect of your mind. And of course, you have to start at the wherever you are. But why is the ugly stuff the most important? Because without it, you would just be enlightened, right? That's the meat of what is keeping you from having the experience, which is already happening here, the experience of the body. So it's kind of funny. The body, you could say, is enlightened. It has never not been enlightened. The senses have always been working, but we've created this immense fantasy in our mind that has created the illusion or the perception that somehow you've distanced yourself from the five senses, right? Distance just means you're not experiencing the senses how they're supposed to be, right? So vision, a very, very small child looks at the world and experiences their vision in this like magnificent way, and we lose that. So think of that for a second. The difference between a 1-year-old looking at the world and an adult, are their eyes different? Meaning, like, is there a fundamental difference in the human eye and the physical eye? No. So the only difference is that the mind is so powerful that it can create a perception shift, which means I'm experiencing my vision differently, although it's the same physical thing. And so if you think about that, what is keeping you from having that experience? So, like, maybe a simple way to say it is to experience the senses more purely, right? Is all of the stuff, that's all of the ugly stuff. And so, if you focus on something like the position of how you're going to meditate, right? And you hold your fingers like that in lotus position. What does that have to do with what is keeping you from experiencing the natural state? Nothing, nothing at all. Um, and there's something else if you want to add something, but I'm trying to remember. Um, yeah, it was something like trying to think of an analogy of when you're chasing what is beautiful, meaning what looks very spiritual, very pure, right? Like when you chase that, um, well, maybe, okay, I just thought of something. So imagine someone two different people. So the first one is someone who looks at the ugly, who is vulnerable, who is real with themselves, right? They're not trying to pretend that there's some angel here on earth. And they keep looking at all of this stuff, right? Wow, I've got this hatred. I don't want to hurt people. I want to be conscious of my hatred. I'm gonna treat people as best I can, but when I'm by myself, in my own mind, I'm gonna look at this hatred. So this is the first person, right? The second person is someone who gets very, very lost in the spiritual lies. So they're being guided by people that never talk about pain, never talk about shadows, and all they're doing is like something that looks really nice on the surface. Like, look at the difference between these two people. The person that's actually looking consciously at their hatred, they're going to become more aware of it. They're going to release it, right, when they're by themselves. When you release hatred really, really powerfully, it opens you up to something else because it's almost like you cleared a little bit of your mind. And so actually someone that has looked at their hatred consciously very, very deeply will also, and many other things, of course, will turn out to be somebody that's very compassionate. If somebody's suffering, they will feel for them and they will not criticize them. Oh, you still don't understand. That's why you're suffering, right? That's a classic one. When somebody thinks that you're suffering because you didn't get it yet. So I want to compare those two, someone that's very compassionate and someone that is following the spiritual, what looks spiritual but has no depth. This person over here, someone could come up to them crying and they will feel nothing for the person because they're not looking at their own tears, right? And so somebody could be saying, my mother just died, and then they could say something, I'm just making this up. It's like, "Oh, you still believe that your mother existed?" Right? You think you exist? Like that's just a story. To a lot of people, that sounds very, very deep, but it's not deep. It's someone who's in denial of their pain, and now they think that they've reached wisdom, really deep wisdom, the wisdom that they know that the self doesn't exist, and someone is right in front of them crying, and they're just basically they feel nothing. So I just wanted to show that difference. When you don't look at the ugly, to most people on the surface, you're going to seem very deep, very wise, like you're able to help people, right? But actually, it turns out that a lot of people in the spiritual community, mostly they don't know that they're doing this. They turn into abusive gurus. And it's basically the dynamic that I said. Somebody can come up to them, and because they're disconnected from their emotions, they can't help anyone. They actually just abuse the person, hurt them even more. And so I guess that's a good starting point. It's like when you don't look at the ugly, what the ego says is the ugly is going to make you even uglier. So don't look at it. When in reality, when you come from a place of conscious, like you're doing it, I want to see it, then when you look at it and you feel it enough, it kind of transforms. I mean, it's a way that you could say this, that if you look at hatred, you express it when you're by yourself. You get really get it out. You could say that like that portion of hatred turns into a little portion of love. Like you could think of it that way. That's why the transformation is so deep. Someone who's not looking at this stuff, that transformation doesn't happen.
Yeah, wanted to pick up on the part where you talked about like chasing the good, I think, or some form of that. That's a very like clear thing to be wary of. I guess what I wanted to pick up on was like the specific things to be wary of in this context of like a good teacher leading you towards ugly and what that is. And then what often happens, or most often happens, is that states of loving states are encouraged to chase by
Yeah.
immature teachers. Um, and I'll come back to that in a second, but the part that you described about, doing a special position in meditation, for example, is so appealing to our egos that our egos find it an extremely hard task to see that they are valueless, like completely worthless, um, in terms of accessing repressed emotion and the ugly, which does lead to liberation, freedom from the suffering, because we're so invested in images that appeal to the egoic version of spiritual that just it's like surely you can't be serious that like sitting in a temple in a special way for so many hours is literally of no use. It's very difficult for our egos to accept that, especially if we've been chasing that for a long time. Um, so back to the loving states one. It's not completely black and white, but an example I've given in the past is in Buddhism, there's a meditation practice called loving kindness, which is to uh, bring up someone in your mind who is causing you difficulty. And I think it can be um, a breadth of severity. So it could be someone who you're currently having like a bit of a difficult time with, and maybe it could be someone who you've had a much worse time with, an abuser, for an example. Um, and the meditation revolves around them, around you wishing this person well. Um, and I say it's not black and white because there is obviously value in practicing compassion in reality, but when it is an actual denial in the moment of how you actually feel towards this person, it's doing so much more harm than it is good. Because what you're doing is practicing, aggressively practicing denial and suppression. And a good teacher, on the other hand, will lead you towards expressing consciously the negative feelings that you have towards this person that you brought up. Um, so the example being you bring this person up, you feel rage towards this person. A good teacher will lead you towards feeling your rage and expressing it consciously, safely, alone, and understanding that the rage you experience is a consequence of your repressed emotion. And you could say an immature teacher will try and uh, almost reject that that's even part of the equation and that you're seeking a more permanent loving state by just forcing your way there, by rejecting that the opposite even exists and that it's an assumption that being kind, compassionate, and loving is all that there is, to go for, and that we're becoming more loving people by willing our way to wish this person well, when in reality, we probably need to murder them in our mind. There'd be like something a lot of deep rage to explore. Um, so yeah, this more mature, um, real example would be a sign of a good teacher because they're leading you towards something that the ego does not like. Doesn't like the First of all, it doesn't like the image of you being angry or an angry person. And then it certainly doesn't like the image of the actual rage work that will be needed with this. It'd be a lot uglier than just admitting that you're angry. Um, I said murdering them in your mind, which might sound very extreme to some people, but that's the extent and beyond where the work will take you. But again, it's to be done in a healthy, conscious way where you understand what's happening and that it's all to do with your buried emotions and not to do with the external manifestation of them. Um, so yeah, I don't know if you have more on that, Steve. I was just trying to think about specific things, specific examples of the way that bad, less mature teachers actively steer you literally in the opposite direction of, I mean, the examples that you already gave, of focusing on spiritual seeming things and embodying them in your mind or physically with whatever it may be. Um, but states is a big one, like chasing particular states.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a good analogy that'll make it more clear. Imagine that this glass is your body, is you, and this water would be like much more full. The water just represents all of the suppressed emotions, which is, you could say there's fear, there's anger, and there's sadness. Um, so you talked about the Buddhist meditation. It's like somebody that abused you your entire life, and you're going to wish them well, which is hilarious. Um, so basically, this is what's happening. Once you see it visually, then it becomes like hilarious. So you're someone that is filled like with tears. So someone abused you for 20 years. And it's so easy to say that in a couple of words, but those were thousands of moments that you felt betrayed and alone and you were damaged psychologically thousands of times. And not only did you have to go through every one of those moments, but now the collection of the abuse is destroying your life and you can't be happy and you're always anxious. So it's like when you put all of that and you really sit with it for a second, can you actually genuinely wish them well? Not yet. Not yet. So this is all of the emotions, right? So whereas the mature teacher will tell you you've got all of this. So if you just told me, let's say your father abused you your entire life. You've got like you can't even imagine how much there is of tears and rage towards your father. And so you're going to have to consciously, responsibly work with these emotions. And I just want to say it like once, which is when you're around other people, it's almost like there are two realms of being. When you're around other people in the real world, you act one way, which is you are in reality. You can affect other human beings. So you try your very best to be the most rational person, to be, respectful. When you are working only inside of your mind, now here's what's kind of funny. If you're by yourself at home, and you are acting out this rage, and it could be, you're stabbing someone, it doesn't matter what it is, you're still working only with your mind. But because there's nobody around, you could say that your mind is now extended to your living room. Let's say you're doing that in the living room, there's nobody there, but you're imagining that you're beating somebody up or doing something. Just because you're physically doing it doesn't mean, in the way that I'm explaining it, that it has spilled into the real world. Whereas when people like hurt others, like literally like hit them or say horrible things, it's almost like the madness and the hurt that is inside the mind has now spilled out into the world and has literally hit another person, right? This is all real. When you're alone and you're working with your rage and you're hitting something or you're saying horrible things, that is an extension of your mind. You can almost imagine like a force shield. And even though you're doing this with your hand or whatever, all of that is only in the mind because you're not hurting anybody else. So I said that, and right, the analogy. So I'm just using this. Imagine like there are two cups, but I only have one. This is a person filled with rage and all, and they go to that Buddhist center and they say, wish them well, and you're there like 20 minutes. I don't know how long it is, and all you're focusing on is feeling something really good, like you love the person. And so you do that for 20 minutes. This has gone nowhere. So that shows you the how big the delusion and denial of somebody teaching you that. So this has gone nowhere. But you might get a very, warm feeling, whatever, if you're able to concentrate because the mind is very powerful. So if you concentrate, you might feel something. Whereas if a teacher tells you, it's not just once, it's very complex, but if you are able to access the rage to such a degree, I've always said this, if the rage has really been triggered, in a few minutes, if you actually learn to do it, it has to disappear in that moment. Like ideally, it doesn't stick around if you are able to embody the depth of how upset you actually are. So if you're feeling like this huge rage, actually it's possible to make it disappear in a few minutes by fully embracing it, right? So I said that. So if you did that, I don't know how many times, but if you've been abused and all of the tears, so many tears, this will slowly become less and less. That is a real transformation, right? And so I just wanted to show that. Imagine you have all of this suffering, and then imagine that up here is the mind, and the mind is just like a dream world, And you're holding all of the suffering, and inside of the mind, this dream world that's up here, you're imagining that you love the person. You're imagining that you don't have any resentment. It's completely pointless. The other thing that's very difficult about this is that because this is the only mature thing to do, the results are not fast. So this is another layer of why this is not taught and why people never get to that stage. Because you could have an experience of crying many, many times and nothing changes. That's why I think awakening is so difficult and why most people really don't go very deep because your perseverance, like this relentless curiosity and even like stamina because it's the suffering is so so bad, but to keep going in the direction of the tears, to keep going more and more and more. Like I'll give you an example. I had embraced my rage to such a degree, but one day I naturally started doing it in real time. But of course, nobody would see me because I'm not gonna remember I'm doing this, it's only in my mind. So if somebody turned around, I was not even waiting to go somewhere private anymore. So as long as like the other person wouldn't hear it or see it, but they're like in the room, I started doing it in the moment, almost like I couldn't wait, but I did it in that very smart way so they would never see it. And so that was another degree, like almost a little bit lower. Like now, I'm not even. Oh, the thing that I just thought was maybe the little bit of resistance was when they triggered me, there would be a little bit more thinking than there should have been. Where now, when I suddenly was doing it, like the second that they triggered me, it was like I couldn't even think anymore. It's like just rage. So it often didn't make any sense, like at all to me, and it was funny. Like somebody would do nothing, and I would turn on and be fuck you, and it was like they didn't do much. This is what's arising, right? This is what's arising, and I did it over and over. When you have all of that, it could take a very long time, but one day you will see a real transformation. And this is why it's so difficult. Like I said, it takes a long time and nobody wants that. And often if it takes a long time, people will say it's wrong. That's
Mm,
so see those in that explanation, you see why most people actually don't go very far because it's almost like a game, like we were saying before we started recording. This doesn't exist, but I imagine like God as a man, and then God's like, I'm going to create this evil game because I'm an evil genius, and I'm going to make it like nearly impossible. Like it's going to have like a labyrinth of like a million things to keep you stuck where you are. And so that's sort of to me is a funny image of what awakening is. It's like you have to have so much perseverance um, to keep seeing basically failure, meaning nothing is changing, nothing is changing to to such a degree, and then you keep going somehow. And then eventually you prove to yourself that you've transformed. And the other thing I wanted to say is, oh yeah, that this is another good one. So imagine that right here, I'm holding a bunch of hatred or resentment or like right now, right? And so this amount, um, what people are trying to do is almost put a love perfume around all of this ugliness, right? And thinking that somehow it's going to work. Whereas if you work with the rage and you go towards it, as it diminishes in that space that, now there's less, that's where real love comes in. And one more thing I wanted to say, funny that they're teaching compassion. It's almost like once you can see it so clearly, it's almost like kids, like little kids thinking that they know what they're doing, but they have no idea. Their compassion is so shallow that compassion to them is feeling a good feeling. That's what compassion is. Where the deepest compassion is, as I've said this before, is so powerful that it's almost got this like indestructible level of compassion that absolutely anything can be seen and it doesn't change because the compassion technically is separate from it. So it's like here's the womb of compassion, and then you have this maybe you have this thought that you've never had. Like you, I'm gonna say like something horrible, like you see a child and you've never had like a thought like I wish I could kill that child. Like, oh wow, like that's a terrible thought. Real compassion is so powerful that it would invite you to explore that to its depths. Like you could whatever you want to do in your mind. That's compassion. And when you're chasing compassion, you're actually, so think about it, your compassion is so weak that it cannot be tested. I had this like thought the other day. It was like when people talk about illusions, right? People, this is another layer of the spiritual lies that people are telling themselves. So they had a very shallow realization. It was only mental. Remember that realization starts, I mean, realization is mental. Like you have this really deep thought, and then it starts to this process. You could say 1% is the realization, 99% is the emotions and releasing the emotions. Um, so back to I was saying the illusion. So a lot of people will say things like, um, I'm trying to remember, like everything is an illusion. Um, right, I remember now. So they will tell you something like your anger is an illusion or your sadness is an illusion. It doesn't exist. But here's the funny thing. If they were very established in reality, right? They're saying that they're telling you, I've realized everything is an illusion. That would mean that they're firmly established in reality. If that were true, someone who is deeply established in reality would venture into illusion as deeply as possible. So think about it. Imagine that this fist that I'm making is this stability that you have. Like I've seen enough of reality that I can walk into, I'm kind of making it a movie, into this hell, which is called the hell of illusion. You're going to have all these things, powerlessness, you want to kill yourself, all these things. Someone who's actually established in reality enough, they're not enlightened yet, that's why they have pain to see. They will say, I will gladly walk in there because I'm so firmly established in reality that I'm not afraid to lose myself in the illusions. But the opposite, when people are telling you everything that you feel, all of your suffering is an illusion, what they're actually saying is, what's the word? I'm so poorly established in reality that I'm terrified to test it. And if I test it, if I start looking at anger and hatred and tears and everything too deeply, I might lose myself. That's what they're actually saying, which means that they're not established in reality enough, which shows that they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Um, I just wrote down um that the initial rejection of the anger is also a sort of a sign of the immaturity, you could say, because it is an act of cruelty as well. It's invalidating, you know. So which is a demonstration of the lack of real compassion of which Steve was talking about. So, a mature teacher will be able to, they are this space in which they have authentic compassion for all that you have to bring there. Healthily and consciously, you're not going to go and attack your teacher and start, offloading directly at them, but they will be able to accommodate the things that you bring with you, without, well, I was going to say without judgment, but really, unless someone's enlightened, they will have judgment, but will see it and it won't belong to anyone. It'll be, um, you know,
You're saying the teacher's judgment? Because that's actually a good topic.
yeah, well, that's what
That's like,
that was what I was going to say. They won't judge you, but yes, they will because they'll be honest about they have their own emotions, assuming most likely you're not going to encounter an authentically enlightened person
yeah.
in your life. That's just statistically not going to happen. Um, but a mature, deeply realized teacher who understands what all of this is about will see that have seen so much of their own stuff that there will be no judgment in that capacity because their heart has become more and more open because they've seen more and more and more and more of themselves. So whatever you have to bring, they've seen in themselves 1,000 times over. So in that capacity, there'll be no judgment. I didn't. What I didn't want to say is that there will be a judgment-free individual. There will still be seeing more and more and more of themselves, which is more and more and more ugly stuff, of which, judgment falls into.
So what I wanted to talk about is that basically what you have out there, and again, they're not doing it on purpose. You basically have probably 99% of people that are very, very shallow, like their realization is very shallow, meaning it was only like mental, almost no emotional embodiment because they don't know how to do it. They don't, it's, and so I'm saying this to kind of show you that so most people are there. I would say that it's very rare to have a self-realized teacher that has matured a little bit in the self-realization. So it's like they've been self-realized and then they've gone a little bit deeper. And then you have someone like Artem, which is like a unicorn. There's almost nobody like that, right? There might have, like we've said, maybe there's like four people like that on the whole planet. And so just to give you kind of a reference point, because people, especially like if you take everybody that's in the spiritual community, they might think that there's many, right? The people that look enlightened because they're wearing, white clothing. Um, but I was gonna say, oh yeah, the very interesting thing about a teacher. So this is the other thing. So to most egos, especially if they've begun their spiritual awakening, um, they think that a good teacher, there's almost this like craziness where it's like you're either enlightened or not a teacher, which is ridiculous based off what I just said. There's almost nobody that's actually genuinely enlightened. So to believe that a teacher either is fully enlightened or not, like there's no, it's like if you're a teacher, you're enlightened, and if you're a teacher and you're not, then you're a fraud. That's basically what people think. Where in reality, I would say that a deeply realized teacher is someone who still has pain, so they're not enlightened, but they have gone so deep that they continue to be honest, brutally honest with themselves. And that will look like, to most people, they will look at a teacher that says, I still have pain or I still have this and that. They'll say, oh, you're not a good teacher then. I only want a teacher that has no pain. Well, there's pretty much none on the planet. And so see how the ego twists everything is upside down. So I'll like just speak for me. I had this funny thought, which is part of being brutally honest. I don't know. I'm just like that. Um, to this day, I see all kinds of pain in my mind. It's very easy to see it. That's the only difference. Even suicidal ideation, it's terrible. Don't get me wrong. It's an awful experience. But compared to before the journey, it's like a piece of cake compared to that, where I was fully identified with the suffering. So to this day, I'm brutally honest about my human desires. So because of that, so like either relationships, sex, which I've never had, and money, because I'm absolutely brutally honest, I never really stop suffering because I'm never using a delusion to say that I'm okay now. So if I believed, I'm claiming that I'm a pretty I'm a deeply realized, I don't know how deeply, but pretty deeply realized teacher. And yet I still see a lot of stuff that I have to look at, right? But the example of what you said about the teacher that would have no judgment, just to give you an example of being brutally honest, which is a sign of a good teacher. And other people say, "Oh, you still have judgment," right? So I could imagine, though I've never been in this position, like working with someone in person and trying to guide them through emotions or whatever, and then they say something. And in my mind could arise a thought like, what an idiot. Or like this person will never like they will never evolve from this. That's a very cruel thought. It's all the callous and all these things, super judgmental. That can still arise in my mind, but it's in that space of I know that that's not real, right? From the place of self-realization. So this is sort of it's interesting. People are looking for enlightened teachers, but I'm not sure I'd even complete the thought, but it's like a really, really good teacher perhaps is someone who still has a lot of pain, but they are so firmly established in a reality that they can't hide their pain from themselves. I think that's actually a good way to put it. They're so established in the truth that I'll just give you another the example again. So I'm here as the teacher, right? The reason why to this day I continue to process I continue to sob and cry and all this stuff is because I could never develop a strong identity as a teacher. So what this means is that no matter how, and my ego, of course, my ego wants to say it, even though it's both true and my ego that I've gone pretty deep. My what was I saying? I completely lost my what was I saying just before?
Um, I can't remember exactly just before, but I was gonna hop on
Yeah.
a few moments ago about the teacher ha having judgment still is because again, like a teacher grounded in reality will understand that although the judgment is not real, it's it's an expression of the pain that's still in them, and they're not kidding themselves about that. So because they're not kidding themselves, they're not lying to themselves that they still have pain and they're still working with it, which you do all the way up until it's gone, which happens to almost no one. Um, um, Now I've lost my train of thought. The so the pain, uh, the judgment is there. They see that the judgment is not real, but they're not kidding themselves that it's not an expression of their unseen pain. They're fully aware of all of that. So although they don't take the judgment seriously, they're not like, oh, I actually think this about this person. This has arisen as an expression of remaining trapped or repressed emotions, which they are aware. They're aware that this is the state that they're in. They're honest about that, which is being real, as opposed to an immature teacher who would have to lie to themselves that they don't have any remaining work to do with their repressed emotions, and therefore have to lie to themselves to retain an image of total um, uh, unconditional love, of which we all are fundamentally, but an immature teacher will have lied to themselves to keep an image up which is not an authentic reflection of where they're at. Because someone who's gone very deep can't lie to themselves like that. It's not possible. You have to be very honest to be a mature teacher. Um,
I was going to say it's sort of like they like the image of being loving. So
mm,
what they're actually focused on is an image of being loving. Because
yeah,
if you think about it, somebody says to them, this person abused me and I have violent images in my mind. I wish I could kill this person. And then they're like, oh, that's not good. You have to, feel love for them. Uh, so they can't, that person that just said that, they cannot feel love for that hatred, which
yeah,
I know sounds crazy. People, the ego immediately will say, "Oh, you love hatred then then you want, people to get hurt." No, it means that the emotion that that human being is feeling, that can be loved.
mm,
And also when I say loved, it's not like in this sweet way. Loving it in yourself is again when you're alone, becoming the hatred. So I think I've said this to myself many, many times. Um, imagine that the hatred, I often like to, just for fun, imagine that it's sort of like a spirit, like all of these ego parts are like floating here, just for a visual. And so this is what's happening, which is funny. So imagine that there's just like a spirit Steve that looks like he would just want to kill somebody. And he's kind of floating here, right? And I'm having a conversation in my mind with this, and he's like, "Oh, I want to kill people. I just feel rage." And I'm like, "Oh, interesting." So maybe I'm kind of open. This is already some openness, right? Because a lot of people will just like reject those thoughts. But then that part of me is looking at me and it says, "But I feel like you don't really get me." You don't really get, like, you say that you get me, but you don't. You say that you love me. I'm going to ask you to do something. And that's going to be the only proof that you actually fully accept me, which is you're going to allow me into your body you're going to become me for a few minutes. You're going to feel the depth of my rage. You're going to feel that I don't care that I hurt people. You're going to feel all of that, the coldness. And then in this image, if they're like, okay, no thanks. Then in that moment that they showed you that if they're pretending to accept it, they're not accepting it at all. And so when you allow yourself to become that, when you're by yourself, and you actually get to the depth where, for example, you're saying the most cruel thing to someone in your imagination, you'd like torture them or something. And I felt this. And you have actually dropped fully into the character where you say the words, they're very real, and you feel no empathy. Right? Then you know you've actually fully entered the character. It's scary for the ego because, oh, now I'm a psychopath. No, there's a psychopath in your mind. A psychopath, a real psychopath is someone that goes out there and starts killing people. But a psychopath lives pretty much in all minds. And so I think that makes it very clear that one immature teacher loves the image of being loving, but their love is so shallow that they would never contemplate actually looking deeply at hatred or stuff like that because it's like their love can't sustain it, basically.
Yeah. And um, the psychopath in the mind, which lives in everyone, it it might sound strange to hear that, and it's hard to describe it. It's not like, oh, we're all secretly psychopaths. It's not what it means. Is that there's a depth to all of our pain, and I can say all of our pain because we are all a product of a deeply sick society, as in like humanity is deeply sick. That's uh, because we're unable to emotionally develop. We don't have safe environments to express all of our emotions all the way through childhood without judgment. You know, a healthy development would be with inner space of complete, unconditional, non-judgmental uh, acceptance. No one has that. Even if they have perfect parents, society doesn't allow for that. So, compounded over years, the depth of our suffering, you could say, amounts to a psychopath in the mind, deep, 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 inaccessible. So you hear that and you're like, well, I don't have that. You can't see, 99% of what's in there, until you start doing this work, and you chip away. I was also just gonna touch on the term self-realized because we use that for talking about teachers. And, being self-realized doesn't necessarily make you a good teacher. So just to um, give a sort of definition, the self-realization sort of moment, you could call it, is seeing through the illusion of the self. So this is the thing that we believe we are for most of our lives, collection of thoughts, memories, ideas, emotions, um, beliefs, all of these things that seem to amount to what we believe an individual to be manifest in a body. So when this is seen through as an experience, not as a mental understanding, the two are very, very different. As an experiential shift in your experience of being, um, that is no longer believed in and can never be believed in again. This is what happens. However, this happens, I'm not sure how many people this happens to, but this is the point in which you can really start doing the emotional work because now there is no uh, personal identification with these things. They're still there. The enormity of them are still there. All of the things, the buried emotions that produced this thing is still there, but you understand that that is not what you are. So the identification with it is not keeping you imprisoned from exploring its depths. So this is where the potential for a mature teacher to emerge happens, because now you can start going very, very deep, and your capacity for love, as in non-judgmental acceptance of what arises, increases because the process that occurs is to see more and more of that. So as a individual who has gone through this experience um, goes through more and more of it, they are now in a position to understand without judgment more and more of other people's experience and internal world. And this is this is you could say the maturity, the further in that direction they go, the more mature and more capacity they have to truly empathize with someone who's bringing these sorts of things to them. They're not someone who's gone through this, in a deep way, is not going to tell them to imagine that they love the person that abused them, or to do anything but confront in a safe way um, the things that are arising for them. So I just wanted to make it very clear that these are the conditions that would have to um, exist for a teacher to be able to really truly help. I'm not saying that anything outside of this bracket is useless. You know, pe people can be extremely helpful and compassionate, or all different stages. But the real, authentic empathy and compassion, understanding, and helpful advice will happen when a teacher is on this path. Um, and I had one more point. Um, I've lost it. But yeah, that's the sort of definition of self-realization and sort of what the difference is.
It's sort of interesting because I guess this whole conversation, I was even reading Artem's like answer, like how to tell if it's an abusive guru or or a genuinely enlightened guru.
Hmm.
And but we didn't say this, but it's kind of obvious, but I just want to say it, that a really good teacher will ultimately just be a very regular human being. And
Mm,
so, and they are the most important is that they're emotionally mature, which to the ego doesn't sound great, right? That doesn't sound very enlightened. Oh, just emotionally mature. It almost sounds like psychological. That's not impressive. That's the most impressive. So what that means is that if this is good if people are in contact with teachers. Let's say that somebody were to say to me that something that I said to them hurt them. And if they say that to me and I were to just explain how they're wrong, that's a great example of an abusive guru. Somebody has said like you hurt me when you said this, and then I can't say, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. Like I didn't know. I'm sorry that I hurt you." Do you see how real that is? But the ego says that doesn't look special, right? That doesn't look like someone, what is it, levitating. That's another good one, right? This a levitating looks good, but the real stuff, you always have to come back to the real stuff. The real stuff is where it's like the most important thing that you will see. And so that's a great example that a teacher could, it seems to know all of this stuff, right, about how to process emotions, but how real are them? How real are they when you speak to them? Or are they, I think he said that in one of his answers, like, are they only ever teaching, no matter like you're crying, and then, and they're like, oh, your tears are actually an illusion. It's like, you're
mm,
not, if a person is crying in front of you, that shows the level of like narcissism where it's like, even if you're crying, I'm going to continue to just like try to show you how superior I am. So it's just so
mm.
obvious, right? And so, yeah, that's very important. How real are they? How human are they?
Yeah. And our examples have been there's a lot of real examples like this of like bad teachers, but they are somewhat on the more exaggerated side. Like
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, there are many teachers that fit these descriptions, but there's still many that don't present like this. So I was just wanting to raise awareness about that, and that their real self-honesty uh, and their behavior in those crucial moments are very telling. Um, because someone who they might not be presenting like a stereotypical guru. They might be they might be very normal. Um, but it's very difficult as as a student, or someone who's speaking to someone who's presenting themselves as a teacher. If the other person is being honest with themselves and therefore even has the ability to understand what you're going through. Because if they're kidding themselves all the time, they haven't actually gone through any of this ugly stuff. And they have to have done that to be able to understand you on any
Yeah.
level. Otherwise, it's just a mental exercise. And really, there may be elements of real care in there, but we forget how powerful the ego when it's all unconscious, when all of this stuff is unconscious. They won't know it, but they're only playing games of superiority with you. That sounds really, really harsh, but remember that I'm saying that they're not aware that they're doing that, but that is what they will be doing. Um, so it's very important to be discerning. It's of course no one's fault. It's the general landscape of teacher and student is a bit of a disaster, really. Um, but I think Steve's example was excellent. Like, are they able to be this space for you, and can they be very honest in a healthy way with you about their experience and um. See, the more I'm saying now, the more I'm realizing how difficult it is for a student. It's not the student's responsibility to be able to discern all of this, but um, hopefully it's useful. Importantly, because unfortunately, um, it's very can be very damaging to build a relationship with someone who hasn't actually done this, who hasn't done the ugly stuff with themselves, and they've got lost in the ego serving mental uh, stuff, which people can do very convincingly. They can learn all about this, like inside and out. They could, say it. They could tell you it maybe better than an authentically realized individual if they've really mentally, um, have the ability with that. So yeah, it's very, very difficult.
I think I just remembered what I completely forgot,
Mhm.
which was another thing to kind of maybe it'll be more clear. Um, to use just me as an example, and then let's say another teacher that is claiming that their like mind is like always at peace, and then they're going to say those things like, if you feel this, it's because you're doing something wrong, like that sort of thing. The reason that, so if you compare that teacher saying I'm always peaceful, I'm enlightened, and you clearly can see that they're immature. The reason that I'm it's kind of odd to say I'm never at peace. I don't want to say that either. It's almost impossible to describe my inner experience, right? It's like in some ways I can't believe that I've gotten even to this beingness or way of living. So the transformation never stops. It just keeps getting better and better. But the reason why I never get too comfortable, that's much more accurate. The reason why I don't get comfortable, where it's like weeks and months and all I'm feeling is just great all the time, is because I'm creating a whole scenario, right? This person doesn't exist, like at least as far as I know. I mean, in the example, they exist. So imagine that that teacher is claiming that they feel wonderful and blah, 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 blah. But what they're actually doing, and I'm creating a parallel. Let's say that they're just like me, right? I've never had a relationship. I've never had sex, so I'm sexually frustrated, and I don't money issues, right? Let's say that that other teacher is the exact same, right? But they've created such a delusion in their mind to escape pain that basically what they're saying to themselves is, I've transcended money. Like I'm superior to it. Like I've gone way beyond it. Like I've detached from money and also relationships and of course sex, right? Because sex is always seen as not spiritual. So if that teacher creates such a deep delusion that not only are those problems non-existent, but they're actually wrong to have those desires. So that's like the layers and layers of delusion. If you want to improve your like financial situation, that's an illusion. You're still attached to money. Oh, you still want a girlfriend, you still want to have sex. All of that is inferior. So I'm speaking as the other teacher. I've transcended it all. So that delusion can create a lot of what I would call fake peace, right? And because the lie is so perfect that all of the pain that has to do with relationships and money, which is like a world of pain, is kind of like there's like anesthesia, just like in surgery. It's there, the pain is there, but the nerves, right? You can't feel them. The reason that I don't experience that is because for whatever reason, my ego has never gone too deep in the teacher identity for me to actually lie to myself so deeply that these desires that I have that are actually the pinnacle of my spiritual awakening, the human stuff, the real stuff is where all the pain is. If I said that to myself, I would be in the biggest denial. I want those things, right? There's a lot of pain with that. And so if I'm not in denial, I'm not fooling myself, and I really don't think like, oh, I'm this fantastic teacher and now I don't have any more problems. I do have problems. And so, because of that deep honesty, and I look at those things constantly, there's going to be pain. And then, to a certain degree, like now, and it's always there's like always more and more, but like the last few weeks, it's been happening so much suicidal ideation, both easy and hard for me to feel, that I start to see more and more profound changes. Right? I was like sharing with Joe, like if I see somebody crying or something like that, it's not that I don't feel compassion. It used to completely trigger me. Like my nervous system was just like fried from seeing people, or if somebody's fighting or something. And I've witnessed now that completely change. And so just to show you that it can take forever, the ego's like, this is never going to change. This is the wrong path. But with enough crying, these miracles, they start to happen, right? Um, so yeah, I think that's it. That was the example. I'm just trying to remember. Um, yeah, so basically, if you never stop lying to yourself, ever, maybe it's not possible because there's in a complete way, because if whatever's still unconscious, you don't even know that it's there. But generally speaking, if you're just honest, like I wish I had more money. Like this is sometimes I wake up and it's like, oh my God, I can't just buy this. It seems like something trivial, but it's actually triggering maybe a deep powerlessness from when you were like 2 years old and you needed a hug and nobody was there. So the fact that I'm able to say this hurts me, right? I don't have the ego of I'm above this. No, I'm honest. This hurts me. Then it connects me to some deep pain that doesn't even have anything to do with money. And so you can frame the entire journey that if you just try your best to be honest, to be vulnerable with yourself, always admitting, that word is great. The ego doesn't want you to admit anything, right? Because it's like you're going to be seen as weak, even to yourself, right? You're not saying this to other people, but you just keep admitting and you keep admitting, and there's the tears and everything. These incredible miracles start to happen, but people want quick miracles. And unfortunately, sadly, that's not how it works.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to stop. I think we've been going for almost an hour.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so we'll wrap it up there. Um, and we'll have the live next Monday. And if you do have any questions for next week, then you know where to leave them. So we'll see you next week, guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.